Hello everyone, welcome everyone to the channel's Strange Night Podcast. Story 1, Knocking from Hell, the Smurl Family Case. I am your companion through the darkness. Tonight we open our new series with one of the most classic and controversial files in the history of paranormal research in the United States. It is a story where the boundary between faith and madness is blurred by physical claw marks on human flesh. Welcome to West Pittston, Pennsylvania. The story began in 1974 when Jack and Janet Smurl, along with their 2 daughters, moved into the house at 106 Chase Street. It was an old, simple duplex, a peaceful place where they hoped to build a quiet home. But from the very first days, the house had its own way of welcoming them. It started with small incidents that anyone could dismiss as coincidences. Light bulbs exploding for no reason, a pungent stench like rotting meat wafting from under the bed, only to vanish in an instant, and heavy footsteps pacing the attic while every family member was downstairs in the kitchen. But the darkness did not stop at psychological pranks. By 1985, a decade after moving in, the entity lurking within the walls decided to reveal itself. Jack Smurl recounted that while he was sleeping, an invisible force lifted him off the bed, suspending him in midair before hurling him violently against the wall. Red, bleeding claw marks appeared on the backs of Janet and the children right before their eyes, without anyone touching them. More terrifyingly, they frequently heard knocking. 3 slow, dry knocks coming from inside the brick walls, a sign that exorcists later claimed was the devil's mockery of the Holy Trinity. The peak of the horror arrived when the entities began physical and sexual assaults. Jack Smurl reported being attacked multiple times at night by a shadow shaped like a woman, but with a face that was a distorted mass of flesh. Their rooms became unnaturally cold, even with the heater running at full capacity. The family dog, a fierce German shepherd, was frequently thrown against windows and would huddle trembling in the corner of the room whenever the shadows fell. In desperation, the Smurls invited the famous paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren to help. Upon entering the home, Lorraine immediately felt an overwhelming surge of malevolent energy. She declared that the house was infested by a high-ranking demon that was manipulating 3 other human spirits to torture the family. A large-scale prayer session was organized, but instead of driving the evil away, it only served to enrage it. A massive shadow, over 7 feet tall, materialized in the middle of the living room in front of several witnesses, claiming that the Smurl family belonged to it. The media caught wind of the story, turning the Chase Street house into a spectacle of curiosity. Crowds gathered, packing the sidewalks in hopes of seeing a shadow or hearing a scream. But behind the camera flashes was the total collapse of a family. After several failed exorcisms by priests from the church, the Smurls were forced to flee their own home in 1989. Even though they left, the haunting never truly ended. Subsequent owners of the house reported still hearing knocking from inside the walls and seeing shadows flitting across the windows. The Smurl case is not just a ghost story. It is a terrifying testament to the fact that sometimes the house you call home is actually a gateway leading straight to hell, where ancient entities wait to devour your soul. Tonight, if you hear a strange sound from behind the wall or catch a whiff of a foul odor, do not be so quick to look for a scientific explanation, because it is possible that the entity knocking at your door does not need your permission to enter. Story 2, The Symphony of Dyatlov Pass, 9 Unexplained Deaths. Welcome back to the Strange Night Podcast. Tonight, we leave the haunted houses of suburbia for a pristine wilderness, a place where the cold can kill a human in minutes, and the silence of the white snow hides one of the most horrifying mysteries of the 20th century. We travel back in time to January 1959 in the remote Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union. In January 1959, a group of 10 experienced students and hikers, led by Igor Dyatlov, began an expedition to conquer the Otorten Peak. One member had to turn back early due to health issues, leaving 9 people to continue the journey into the region known as the Dead Mountain. They were young, healthy, and possessed top-tier survival skills, but they never returned. When the rescue team found their camp at the pass, later named Dyatlov Pass, they were confronted with a scene that defied common logic.
The group's tent had been ripped open, not from the outside, but from the inside. It appeared the people inside were so panicked they didn't have time to unzip the tent, and instead used knives to slash the fabric to escape. In the biting cold of minus 30 degrees Celsius, 9 people rushed out without shoes, without coats, and some wearing only their underwear. The first bodies were found at the edge of the forest, nearly 1.5 kilometers from the tent. 2 died huddled under a large pine tree. Their limbs were severely scraped, as if they had desperately tried to climb the tree to escape something on the ground. 3 other bodies, including the leader, Dyatlov, were scattered on the path back to the tent, appearing as though they collapsed while trying to crawl back with their final breaths. But the true horror lay in the final 4 bodies, discovered in a deep ravine months later. These victims carried injuries that forensic doctors described as impossible to be caused by a human. One person's chest was crushed with a force equivalent to a high-speed car crash. Yet, strangely, there were no external bruises or soft tissue damage. Another person was missing their tongue, their lips, and both eye sockets were completely hollow. Test results further revealed that the victims' clothing contained unnaturally high levels of radiation. Their skin had turned a strange orange hue by the time they were found. The Soviet authorities at the time quickly closed the case with the vague conclusion that they died due to a compelling natural force. A flurry of theories emerged, from an avalanche or an attack by the indigenous Mansi people, to secret weapon testing or even UFOs. However, no theory explains why professional hikers would be terrified enough to tear their own tent and run into the white death unprotected. The frozen look of terror on the faces of those young people suggests something invisible, an infrasound frequency causing hallucinations, or an entity from another dimension that hunted them to the end. To this day, Dyatlov Pass stands silent amidst the wind and snow. The souls of those 9 young people seem to still be wandering, trying to recount their final symphony, a symphony of pain and horror that no survivor lived to decode. Tonight, if you feel a sudden cold breeze brush against your neck, remember that somewhere in the world there are secrets still buried under thick snow, waiting for the day to be revealed. Or perhaps it is best they stay asleep forever. Story 3. The Boy in the Box, the 65-year mystery in Philadelphia. Tonight, we reopen one of the most painful and mysterious files in the annals of American crime. This is the story of a nameless child, an investigation that lasted over half a century, and a chilling silence from the very people who were supposed to protect him. On a late February day in 1957, in the Fox Chase section of Philadelphia, a young hunter checking his traps stumbled upon a cardboard box for a bassinet lying discarded in the underbrush. Curious, he approached and peered inside. A cold jolt ran down his spine as he realized it wasn't trash. Inside was the body of a young boy, wrapped in a scrap of old flannel blanket. The Philadelphia police arrived immediately. The victim was a boy between 4 and 6 years old, with pale blue eyes and fair skin. However, the condition of the child was what truly horrified the detectives. The boy was so thin he appeared severely malnourished. His hair had been recently and hastily cut, chopped in jagged clumps that still clung to his body, as if someone were trying to disguise his identity. His small body was covered in scars, on his ankles, groin, and chin, the silent markers of a life of prolonged abuse. Strangely, despite the police distributing millions of flyers and posting his photo in every police station, hospital, and orphanage across the United States, no one came forward to claim him. America's unknown child became the name that haunted the conscience of the entire city of Philadelphia. Over the decades, a series of dark theories emerged. Some believed the boy was the son of an undocumented immigrant mother who had passed away. The most famous theory involved a woman known only as M. She claimed her mother had bought the boy from another family and kept him locked in the basement for years, abusing him until he died following an accident in the bathtub. However, M's testimony was never fully verified due to her mental health struggles. It wasn't until late 2022, thanks to the monumental breakthroughs in genetic genealogy, that the mystery of his identity was finally unraveled. After 65 years, the unknown child finally had a name: Joseph Augustus Zarelli. He was born on January 13th, 1953, but a name does not bring absolute justice. Though we now know who Joseph was, the identity of the person who took his life, who cut his hair and placed him in that bassinet box before tossing it into the woods, remains a shadow in the dark. His biological parents have passed away, and those still living have maintained a terrifying silence about Joseph's existence for over 6 decades. Joseph lived a short life in the shadows and was discarded like a broken object. His story is not just a criminal case. It is a bone-chilling reminder that monsters in human form can live right next door, capable of erasing a life and carrying that secret to their graves. Tonight, as you look at old family photos, remember that every name has a soul, and some souls have had to wait nearly a lifetime just to be called by their name one last time before finally finding peace. Story 4. The Curse of the Laurie Family. The Clawing Hands. Welcome back to the Strange Night Podcast. Tonight, we leave the noisy urban centers for the raw, fog-drenched landscape of the Scottish Highlands. This is the story of an ancient stone house named Scaray, where a family experienced true horror upon realizing that sometimes what we call the past is still very much present. In the early 1960s, the Laurie family, led by a father who was a seasoned veteran, decided to move into an isolated old stone house in the village of Scaray, seeking peace and quiet. But within the first week, that silence was shattered by the impossible. It began when Mr. Laurie walked into the living room and noticed strange smudges on the ceiling. Looking closer, his blood ran cold. They were tiny handprints, still stained with damp mud, pressed firmly into the white plaster. The ceiling was over 10 feet high. The family had no young children who could reach it, and there were no signs of a ladder or chair being used. He wiped them clean, but the next morning the handprints returned. This time they had moved closer to the bedroom entrance. As days passed, the disturbances grew violent. The youngest daughter began exhibiting strange behavior. She would sit alone in dark corners, whispering to herself. When asked, she innocently replied that she was playing with The man with no face. An entity she described as tall, devoid of eyes or a nose, and smelling of damp earth. Every night, the entire family was jolted awake by violent scratching sounds emanating from within the thick stone walls. It wasn't the sound of rats or wild animals. It sounded like human fingernails, desperately trying to claw their way out of a sealed tomb. Terrified, Mr. Lorry decided to break open a section of the wall at the foot of the stairs to find the source.
Inside the cavity between the stone layers, they found no bodies, but they discovered something equally macabre. Dozens of old children's shoes, tightly packed and intentionally arranged. This was an ancient Scottish Highland custom used to ward off or feed abandoned spirits. Once the shoes were disturbed, the entity in the house seemed to lose all control. The breaking point came on a stormy night. The eldest son was walking down the stairs when an invisible force grabbed his legs and dragged him downward. He suffered severe injuries and fell into a state of extreme panic, claiming he saw dozens of tiny hands reaching out from the cracks in the walls to pull him in. The Lorry family fled the house that very night, leaving all their belongings behind. Local residents later whispered that the scary house was built on the ruins of a site where a massacre occurred during a period of religious purging, where children were rumored to have been buried alive within the walls as sacrifices to protect the land. To this day, the house stands derelict and shunned. They say that if you stand long enough before its door at twilight, you can still hear the faint, muffled scratching and see muddy handprints slowly appearing on the window panes. Tonight, if you are staying in an old house, take a look up at your ceiling. Those yellow stains might not be from a water leak. They might be the traces of a hand trying to find its way back into the world of the living. Story 5. The Song Beneath the Earth. The Paris Catacombs. Tonight we leave the surface world to descend into the depths of one of the most romantic cities on Earth. But beneath the glamorous lights of Paris lies a completely different world, a labyrinth of darkness and death, holding the remains of over 6 million people. Welcome to the deepest level of fear. The Paris catacombs are a network of tunnels stretching for hundreds of kilometers, where human bones are stacked into towering walls. Most of this maze is strictly forbidden to the public due to unstable structures and a 100% chance of getting lost. Yet it is this very danger that attracts cataphiles, illegal urban explorers. In the early 1990s, a group of explorers trekking through an unmapped sector found a video camera lying solitary on the dusty ground. The tape was still inside. When they took it home and pressed play, what appeared became one of the most haunting pieces of footage ever recovered from the underground. The footage begins with an anonymous man carrying a flashlight and the camera, venturing deep into the narrow crevices of the catacombs. At first, he seems calm, occasionally stopping to film close-ups of neatly arranged skulls. But after about 30 minutes, the atmosphere of the video shifts. The man's breathing becomes heavy and labored. He begins to hear strange sounds. It isn't the whistling of the wind, but a low humming or murmuring, as if thousands of voices are whispering simultaneously from deep within the rock. Suddenly, the man panics. He starts to run. The sound of his boots pounding against the damp earth echoes through the tunnels. He sprints past turns and junctions with no regard for direction, the camera shaking violently. What is most chilling is that he never looks back, yet his frantic movements suggest he knows with absolute certainty that something is hunting him, right at his heels. In a narrow corridor, he trips and falls, dropping the camera. In the final moments before the battery dies or the device breaks,
He is seen scrambling to his feet, abandoning the camera, and sprinting into the pitch-black void, screaming unintelligible words. Police conducted several searches based on the landmarks in the video, but never found the man, nor were there any missing persons reports that matched his description. Some believe he was enchanted by a strange acoustic frequency deep underground, luring him into areas with no exit. Veteran cataphiles say that in the deepest layers of the catacombs, where the air is thin and the darkness is thick, the walls of bone are not inanimate. They are filters that trap the screams of the past. To this day, the footage serves as a warning to anyone intending to disturb the rest of the souls beneath Paris. They say if you wander into the forbidden zones, you will start to hear the singing, a mournful melody that lures you further and further until your flashlight fades and you become just another piece of the wall. Tonight, if you find yourself in a tight space or a dark basement, listen closely. Silence is sometimes not the absence of sound. It is merely the preparation for a whisper you never want to hear. Story 6. The Murderer on the Bus. The Greyhound Tragedy. Tonight we won't be talking about invisible entities or ancient catacombs. We are going to talk about a different kind of demon, the kind that hides inside the human mind and can erupt at the most ordinary moment on the most ordinary journey. This is the file on Greyhound Bus number 1170. On the night of July 30th, 2008, a Greyhound bus was cutting through the desolate fields of Manitoba, Canada. On board were passengers exhausted after a long day, most of them dozing off in the dim, flickering lights of the cabin. Among them was Tim McLean, a gentle 22-year-old man, wearing headphones and leaning his head against the window to catch some sleep. Sitting next to Tim was a middle-aged man named Vince Wei-Guang Lee. For the first half of the trip, Lee didn't utter a word, nor did he show any unusual behavior. But as the clock neared midnight, a horrific event occurred that would leave everyone who witnessed it with psychological scars for a lifetime. Without a single warning, without a single argument, Lee suddenly pulled out a large knife and began repeatedly stabbing Tim McLean in the neck and chest. Tim's agonizing screams shattered the silence of the night. The driver pulled over to the shoulder, and panicked passengers scrambled to escape the bus. But Lee did not stop. He proceeded to commit the most brutal acts imaginable upon Tim's body, right there on the bus. When police surrounded the vehicle, they witnessed a scene straight out of a slasher film. Lee was pacing calmly inside the bus, holding parts of the victim and bringing them to his mouth. Later, he held up a part of Tim's body to the window as a mad challenge to the officers standing outside. The standoff lasted for several hours. When he was finally apprehended, Lee said only one thing: "Please kill me." During the subsequent trial, it was concluded that Lee suffered from acute schizophrenia. He claimed he had heard the voice of God in his head, telling him that Tim McLean was actually a force of evil, a demon in human form sent to destroy him, and that he had to strike first to save himself. The most chilling aspect of this case is not just the violence, but its sheer randomness. Tim McLean did not know Lee. He had done nothing to provoke him. He was simply a young man on his way home who happened to sit next to a psychological time bomb. The case ended with Lee being sent to a psychiatric hospital instead of prison, and after several years of treatment, he was released under a new name. But for the victim's family and the passengers on that night bus, the nightmare has never ended. They can never step onto public transport again without staring at the person sitting next to them with a sense of horrific suspicion. Tonight, if you are sitting on a train, a bus, or even just in a public place, take a look at the stranger sitting beside you. What do you see? A tired worker? A student reading a book? Or is there a voice whispering behind that calm exterior, commanding them to do the unthinkable? Story 7. The Mystery of the Mary Celeste. The Silence of the Ocean. Tonight we leave the mainland to venture into the vast, cold expanse of the ocean. There are mysteries buried at the bottom of the deep sea, but there are also mysteries that drift right on the surface, exposed to our eyes yet never offering an answer. This is the file on the most famous ghost ship of all time. On December 4th, 1872, the ship De Gratia was sailing between the Azores and Portugal when it spotted another vessel drifting erratically. It was the Mary Celeste, a merchant ship that had departed New York just a month earlier. When the captain of the De Gratia sent a boarding party to investigate, they witnessed a scene that would enter maritime history as an unsolvable riddle. The ship was completely intact. The sails were still set, and the cargo, 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol, was still in place. Food remained on the table in the cabin. The crew's belongings were dry, and there were no signs of a struggle or piracy. However, there wasn't a single soul on board. Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife, their 2-year-old daughter, and the 7-man crew had vanished as if they had been plucked off the deck by a giant hand. The ship's only lifeboat was missing. But why? A seasoned captain like Briggs would never order his family and crew to abandon a perfectly seaworthy ship to hop into a small boat in the middle of the vast ocean, unless there was a catastrophic threat. The logbook found on the desk had entries up until November 25th, with not a single line suggesting panic or natural disaster. Everything just stopped, abruptly. It was a bone-chilling silence. For over a century, a litany of theories has been proposed. A crew mutiny? An attack by a giant sea monster? Or perhaps a leak of toxic fumes from the alcohol barrels causing mass hallucinations? A modern scientific theory suggests that a small explosion of alcohol vapors occurred. Not enough to damage the ship, but enough to panic the captain into ordering everyone into the lifeboat temporarily, only for the tow line to snap, leaving them stranded in the wake of their own vessel. But these are all just guesses. Not a single body was ever found, and not a single fragment of the lifeboat ever washed ashore. 10 human beings simply evaporated from reality. The most haunting thing about the Mary Celeste is not what happened, but its silence. The ship continued to sail, carrying full stores of food, clothing, and family mementos, while the souls who owned them had already been claimed by the eternal deep. Tonight, when you stand before the sea and look toward the distant horizon, remember that the ocean doesn't just hold water. It holds secrets that humans were never meant to know. And sometimes, what is left behind is more terrifying than what was lost. Story 8. The Dozier School for Boys. The Unnamed Graves. Tonight we open a file whose reality is more brutal than any fiction. There are places built to educate and protect, but behind those red brick walls, they can become graveyards for dreams and the lives of innocent children. Welcome to a living hell on earth in Florida. The Arthur G. Dozier School for Boys in Marianna, Florida, opened in 1900 with the initial goal of being a reform school for troubled youth. But throughout its 111 years of operation, it became the epicenter of rumors regarding cruelty, torture, and mysterious disappearances. For decades, the survivors who returned, men who call themselves the White House Boys, told stories that made listeners shudder. The White House was a small, isolated building on the school grounds. It wasn't a place to live. It was a place for punishment.
Night after night, children were dragged from their beds, taken to this room, and brutally beaten with thick rubber straps until their flesh was torn and they lost consciousness. The screams of the children were drowned out by the roar of industrial fans so that no one outside could hear. But the most terrifying part wasn't just the beatings. It was the children who went into the White House and never came out. When questioned, the wardens would offer dismissive excuses like, they ran away, or they died of pneumonia. The truth was only exposed in 2012, a year after the school was closed forever. Archaeologists and anthropologists from the University of South Florida conducted an excavation of the school grounds. What they found shocked the entire nation. More than 50 unnamed graves scattered beneath the dirt and debris. As the bodies were exhumed, the traces of crime were plain to see. There were skeletal remains of children with bullet wounds in their skulls, rib cages shattered by extreme physical impact, and children buried with their belt buckles still attached, indicating they were tossed into the earth while still fully clothed. Even more frighteningly, the number of remains found far exceeded the school's official death records. The abandoned souls at Dozier seem unable to find peace. Locals living near the abandoned school grounds report that on rainy nights, they still hear sobbing coming from the direction of the woods and see the silhouettes of small children wandering between the buildings, as if they are still trying to find a way to escape the cruel wardens of the past. The Dozier School is now nothing but ruins, but the air surrounding it remains thick with resentment. It stands as a testament to a dark chapter in history, where human cruelty was carried out in the name of education to torment the most vulnerable. Tonight, if you happen to pass by an old abandoned building and hear the whisper of a child, do not look back, because there are pains that never fade with time, and there are souls still waiting for an apology they will never receive. Story 9. The Mirror at Myrtle's Plantation, Trapped in the Reflection. Tonight we journey to the land of bayous and ancient curses, Louisiana. Amidst the rows of ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss stands a mansion called Myrtle's, famously known as the most haunted house in America. But among the countless ghosts said to wander here, there is one object that makes anyone who looks at it shudder. A large mirror located in the main hallway. The story begins in the 19th century with an enslaved woman named Chloe. Out of jealousy and fear, Chloe made a fatal mistake by baking a cake laced with poisonous oleander leaves for the family of her master, Clark Woodruff. Her intention was only to make them mildly ill so she could nurse them back to health and gain their trust. But her miscalculation led to the tragic deaths of Sarah Woodruff and her 2 young daughters. According to ancient Southern American tradition, when someone dies in a house, all mirrors must be covered with black cloth. This ensures that their souls can depart to the afterlife without getting trapped in the reflections. However, legend says that on that fateful night, one large mirror in the hallway was overlooked. Since then, bizarre phenomena began to occur with this specific mirror. Visitors and staff at the plantation frequently report seeing tiny handprints etched onto the glass. What's terrifying is that these handprints appear to be pressed from the inside looking out, rather than touched from the outside. Despite staff using the strongest cleaning chemicals available, those handprints stubbornly reappear just hours later. Sometimes people see the misty silhouettes of a woman in a long dress and two small children standing motionless inside the mirror, staring at those in the real world.
Others claim that when they walk past the mirror, their reflection does not move with them, or they see a completely strange face smiling at them from over their shoulder. Paranormal experts believe that the souls of Sarah and her children are permanently imprisoned within the silvering of the glass. The mirror is no longer a decorative item. It has become a lens into a parallel dimension of suffering, where time stands still and death is an endless loop. Many believe the mirror at Myrtle's serves as a reminder of crimes and regrets that can never be undone. It stands there as a silent witness to the tragedies of the past, waiting to catch the gaze of the curious and plant a seed of primal fear in their minds. Tonight, before you go to bed, take a look at the mirror in your room. Are you certain the person standing in the mirror is you? Or is it another entity mimicking your every move, waiting for a single moment of distraction to switch places with you?
Story 10. The Mystery of the Cecil Hotel, the Final Destination. Welcome back to the Strange Night Podcast. Tonight we conclude our journey in a location that has become a symbol of misfortune and death right in the heart of glamorous Los Angeles. It is a place where darkness seems to have soaked into every brick, where the boundary between reality and madness is as thin as a veil of smoke. Welcome to the Hotel of Death. The Cecil Hotel is not just a building, it is a magnet for tragedy. Since opening its doors in 1924, it has recorded dozens of suicides, served as a hideout for notorious serial killers like Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, and been the scene of countless unsolved murders. But the case that shocked the world most was the disappearance and death of Elisa Lam in 2013. It all began with a piece of elevator surveillance footage released by the police. In the video, Elisa Lam, a young Canadian student, exhibits inexplicable behavior.
She presses multiple buttons, hides in the corner of the elevator as if dodging someone, and frantically waves her hands as if conversing with an invisible entity in the hallway. Finally, she steps out of the elevator and vanishes into the darkness. Weeks later, guests began complaining about the hotel's water having a blackish tint, a strange taste, and very low pressure. When maintenance checked the water tanks on the rooftop, they found Elisa Lam's decomposing body inside. The question remains, how could a petite girl climb to the roof alone, open a heavy water tank lid, which was locked and equipped with an alarm, jump inside, and then close the lid from the outside? Countless theories have been proposed, ranging from a sudden psychotic break to supernatural forces dwelling within the Cecil. Some believe the hotel was built over a gateway to hell, where malevolent spirits lurk in the endless hallways, whispering into the ears of guests and luring them to their doom. The Cecil is more than just a hotel.
It is a living entity that devours life. The decaying rooms, narrow corridors, and air thick with the scent of despair create an atmosphere that weighs heavily on anyone who enters. Although the hotel has since been rebranded and renovated, the scars of the past remain, waiting for the next victim. Tonight, as our series comes to a close, remember that this world still holds many dark corners where the light has yet to reach. The stories I have told you are not just for entertainment. They are a reminder. Always be wary of what you see, and be even more wary of what you cannot see. Thank you for journeying with the Strange Night Podcast through 10 haunting stories. The truth may be terrifying, but it is always worth hearing. This series may end here, but the mysteries out there will never run dry. Wishing you a peaceful night's sleep. if possible. Farewell. Thank you for listening to this series. Please like and subscribe to the channel to hear the next series.